So on organization, if you think about it, like if we were talking about CRM strategy or CRM execution, I think anyone in this room could have a conversation and we could sort it out and kind of think through the whole process. But when it comes to talking about organization, my experience is people kind of tend to kind of glaze over a little bit. It's, is it a bit of process? Is it a bit of governance? Is it about the people? What are we really trying to do with organization? As we've heard throughout the summit, though, despite the fact that it might be a little uncomfortable at times to have organizational discussions within your companies, it is one of the most critical things that we have to get right. So why don't we'll just get into it now. So our view is that organization is the secret sauce to success. For those of you who are in David's kickoff, he referenced this slide. I'm just going to touch on it again briefly. This is an infographic from a study that I did while I was at IBM. And what it does is it is illustrating the differences in what successful companies do versus less unsuccessful companies do in terms of how they approach CRM in their organizations. So the percentages indicate the degree of difference. So in the first column on the far left, you see sponsorship, assessments, and funding management. Sort of the table stakes there, it's about 8%. It's a low percentage because it basically means everybody does it. It's not really a differentiator. The next column over, the disciplined approach, is where you pick up the data governance, the project objectives, the roadmap. That adds about 33% more up to success. So collectively, it's about 40%. 2 out of 5. Still not great odds if you're a gambler. It's not until you get to the far right, where you're looking at the culture, the business process, the overall leadership and governance, and the organizational realignment, do you really start to get the greatest odds of success in your CRM efforts. And if you look at all those things, those are all organizationally related. So when I take a step back and I kind of look at this and I say, well, this isn't terribly new. It's been around. This has been a circumstance for a while. And it's like, why is this the way it is? So I look to the stuff on the left and I say, well, geez, they got the technology, you got a lot of the roadmap, a lot of the investments. That's really where the heavy lifting from the financials are. And on the right, it costs money, but it's not really as much money as what you have to spend on the left. So we ask the question, it's like, why is it that we have so much trouble driving lasting change in organizations? So as it turns out, we did another study. We did one that Merkle just came out of market, about 350 executives, mostly in the US. We looked at what they were trying to accomplish, how they were going about it, what their priorities were. And we came up with a lot of insights on what's going on in CRM, the barriers, and the key success factors. David touched on some of this in his keynote. There's a white paper on the tablets. If you go under the documents into the summit, this white paper, it's pre-launch. We're going to launch it sometime in the next month. It has a lot of the insights that answer the what's wrong, why we're having trouble with lasting change. But the one point that I want to make from this today is it wasn't so much that the top companies were doing things that were different from the bottom. They were doing the same types of things, but the top companies were doing them to a much greater degree, a much greater extent, where the lower companies that were not as successful were kind of doing it in sort of a check-the-box mentality there. So I think that is ultimately one of the big differentiators here. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So organization is the 5th pillar of our Connected CRM framework. What is it? The way we look at it is it's how the company aligns to the vision and performs Connected CRM in the enterprise. It's how the processes work together, how the organization come together, the people come together, how the technology is used. It's the whole thing. It's how we do all of the other parts of Connected CRM. In our view, you cannot unlock high-performance CRM potential without dealing with organization. Yeah, could you do some campaigns? Sure, you could go do some campaigns. But if you really want to do the kind of Connected CRM that we're talking about here, you have to do and deal with the organizational dimension. So there's 4 parts of it that we're going to go through today. There's leadership alignment, there's integrated collaborative work groups, high-performing teams, and frontline empowerment. So I'm going to take you to leadership alignment first. So leadership alignment is the concept that, what we've seen is that the very best CRM organizations are driven by leaders who can align the executives in the organization to a shared vision for CRM. They provide the true sponsorship and the drive. They set goals and they get budget holders to make commitments based upon the ability to do CRM. It's really, in this case, it's about the sponsorship, materiality, and the alignment. So I'm going to talk about permission versus sponsorship. And so they're both forms of support. I'm supporting you. The highest form of support we have here is sponsorship. A lesser form of support is permission. I'm going to let you go do it. I'm not going to object. It's okay to go ahead and do that. They're very different things, and I think sometimes people confuse them. So let me give you an example. So, Steve, here I am. I'm going to run into my boss's office. He's in the room somewhere here. And I'm going to say, I got this great idea. It's going to cost a little bit of money, but when we're done, it's going to create all these benefits for our company. And he says, great, go ahead and do it. So is that sponsorship or is that permission? Well, at this point, we don't know yet, because it could be either one. So if he then goes on and talks to all the other executives in the company, explains what we're doing, reiterates how important it is that this is a high priority for us, high priority for Steve. He's going to drive this for us. We really need the outcome. If he asks for updates, if he comments on the updates, if he attends the meetings, that's visibility of sponsorship. Now, on the other hand, if he comes to the kickoff and maybe does email during the meeting, or if I send him updates and he's not responding or giving any kind of commentary on the updates, that's more like permission. And you can see the differences. What we've seen in the more successful companies is that their sponsors are truly sponsors. So that's really the challenge there. It's to get the senior leaders to be sponsors for the program. Now, the second question on materiality. This is a funding case. The actual numbers aren't that important in this case. But a funding case is essentially a promise between a set of budget holders and the organization that if we deploy a set of resources in a particular way, we're going to produce an outcome that's beneficial. If you're creating your business case or your funding case after your strategy is complete, you've probably done it too late. It's one of those things that you have to agree on the metrics early on and then build it and use the metrics to refine the story and the strategy to get to a vision that the executives and the budget holders will align to and share, so that they're agreeing that, yes, I see these metrics, I believe these changes will drive these types of results for our organization. That kind of funding case is one that will stand up over time. Now, to the question of materiality, I'll give you an example here. So is a $1 million increase in revenue material? Is a $10 million increase in revenue material? $100 million, $1 billion? In reality, the answer is it depends on your organization and what you're trying to accomplish. So I had a team at a large automotive company a few years ago. It's a $150 billion company. And our team had identified $1 billion in sales opportunities for them. $1 billion opportunity for them over a few years. And we were all very excited because we said, oh my goodness, we got $1 billion that we brought to the leadership of this company. And when we did, they listened to us, they were polite, and they kind of engaged, and they said, you know what, guys, it's not enough. We need more than $1 billion because we're trying to move the share price of our company, and I've got other priorities. There are only so many things that I can do at once. So even a big number may not actually be material to your organization. Each of you have to figure that out for your own organization in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, how big is big. And the other note to that is that if you're going to create a material benefit, you should reasonably expect that there'll be a material investment that goes with that material benefit. And that if they're misaligned, there might be something wrong either with your understanding of what it's actually going to cost to do it, or there might be something wrong with your vision of the benefits. So one last thing on alignment, and I'll turn it over to Brian. Just in your seats, I'm going to give you a quick test here. 5 questions. It's on a scale of 1 to 7. Strongly disagree, strongly agree. Think of your organizations and where you are in your CRM journey right now. So first question, does each executive buy into and talk up the vision as a topmost organizational priority? Is each executive able to articulate the vision, including what it means for customers? Is each executive able to describe the high-level impact on the business operations? Do they have skin in the game? So essentially, are they committing resources? Have they committed to improvements? And do your executives have complementary incentives and metrics for a sense of shared success or failure? So each one of those, 1 to 7, in your heads. Here's how we would read this. If you answered and scored greater than 30, you're probably in pretty good shape. If you're in the sort of the 25 to 30 range, you might have some work to do. But if you're less than 25, you have work to do. And it's not enough to be average. When we talked about it's to a great extent, you have to help get these people to a spot where they are very supportive of what you're trying to do and are able to be sponsors. So that is the leadership alignment section. Off to Brian.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Let's talk about integrated collaborative work groups. I've had a number of conversations with several of you during the last couple days, and I was really struck by how often the idea of business silos and the inability to work across work groups came up. But it's nothing new to us. We've been dealing with this since kindergarten, or maybe nursery school, where it just is tough to work with other groups, particularly when other groups have perhaps other objectives and incentives. Let me give you a story. This is not a CRM story, but I think it's a particularly relevant one. In 2001, Apple came out with the iPod. In 2003, they came out with the iTunes Store. Well, it turns out that there was another company that had hardware, that had software, and they had something that Apple didn't have, and that was content. And that company was Sony. Sony couldn't get out of its own way. Sony could not break down the business silos. Apple could. What are the 2 major reasons for that? Number 1, a guy named Steve Jobs. Force of personality, but importantly, he was able to make decisions across the various groups within Apple. Reason number 2, Apple was focused on a few products. The result, literally billions of dollars. I think that might meet your materiality test.
I think so.
So what are the 4 fundamental areas behind driving to more integrated collaborative work groups? Number 1, responsibility and accountability. Number 2, business processes and outputs. Number 3, aligned success metrics. And number 4, handoffs and information flows. We're going to hold off on the responsibilities and accountabilities for just a moment. We've got a couple of slides on that. But let me tackle numbers 2, 3, and 4 with a couple of anecdotes. First, business processes and outputs. Defining the business processes and assigning accountability for those business processes is pretty critical. What some companies do is actually identify change agents whose job is to go through and streamline those processes and identify who's responsible for them. USAA did something very interesting. They identified 100 key experiences, and those experiences might be something like buying a car or preparing to deploy abroad. And they used journey mapping and other great techniques to do that. And then they went through and identified the specific capabilities and processes behind each one of those key experiences. And they took it a step further and they identified who was responsible for each one of those processes and who was accountable to make sure that those processes worked effectively. Aligned success metrics. A recent client of mine is in an interesting situation. They've got multiple business groups that sell products to essentially the same mass audience, a broad audience. However, they do not work together in terms of marketing to that audience. One person actually said to me, I've got my customers. If another business group wants to know about my customers, they've got to prove that they have a relationship with that customer too. Ouch. Why is that? That's because the success metrics, the incentives for the various groups are not aligned. Each executive in charge of each business group is responsible for the success of his business group. Occasionally, he might put on his corporate hat, but he's not incented to do so. And therefore, you have that kind of behavior, which is kind of crazy. The fourth area here on the list is handoffs and information flows. It turns out that the handoffs between work groups is particularly important, and often that's where they fail. It turns out 10 years ago, the CRM marketplace came out with some interesting technology, marketing resource management, or MRM technology, which is specifically designed to optimize and orchestrate workflows between groups within a company and between the company and external groups like agencies. Again, responding to the fact that handoffs and information flow is particularly critical. Let me come back into responsibilities and accountabilities. Why is that particularly a problem today, and why is that particularly a problem with CRM? Because the old world had product-centric and channel-centric, and the boundaries between those was fairly distinct, and if it wasn't distinct, you could at least work out what those handoffs and those responsibilities really were. Then what did we do as CRM people? We responded to the marketplace and came up with a set of customer objectives. And unfortunately, for integrated collaborative work groups, customer objectives overlap significantly with product objectives and channel objectives. And the boundaries multiplied, and trying to figure out how to work customer objectives in the context of what else was in the company became very difficult. So what's critical to deal with this is decision making. Who gets to decide what and when? When do you know that you've got a decision-making problem? A couple of flags. Your decision hierarchy is ill-defined. Transparency is weak. It's not clear who's responsible for decisions. And the consequences of bad decision-making aren't really well managed. A couple of ideas here in terms of fixing this. First, agree on rules and operating guidelines before you get into specific situations. Second, set up a decision hierarchy that establishes who gets to decide what. And honestly, you may have to remix how you're currently doing decision-making. 3, figure out who is accountable, therefore who has the decision-making role, and who is in an advisory or influencing role. 4th, determine the latitude that each person has to make decisions that impact other work groups. And 5th, set up formal mechanism to resolve, to mediate the inevitable disputes that you're going to have. So one technique that a lot of companies use is, and you may be familiar with, is the Raci Model. Fairly simple in concept, a little more challenging in execution, but essentially it looks at 4 things. Who's responsible? There may be multiple people that are responsible to do the work. Who's accountable? And there's typically one person who is accountable for the work, and that person often determines the responsibilities. 3, who is consulted? And typically that's a subject matter expert, and that consultation happens before a decision is made. And finally, who's informed? Who is told of the decision after the fact? Raci is pretty cool because you can deploy it at multiple levels. You can deploy it at the leadership level, you can deploy it at the work group level, and you can deploy it at the individual level. Our third major area is high-performing team. Right people with the right attributes and competencies in place with the right training and the right incentives. Basically, this is getting the right butts in the right seats. The top talent piece, I think we all have a pretty good understanding of, but particularly in CRM and CRM leadership, you have to have people with the right background, the right expertise, and get them in the right roles. I want to focus specifically about training and potential new roles to consider for your organization. We're going to hear in one of the breakouts a little more about a situation at a life insurance company where they needed to deploy some good work that had been done around customer segments. So how do you get that down to your customer service representatives in your call centers? Well, the approach that was taken here was to, let's train up some change agents. Let's get the change agents to understand what needs to be done, because this kind of training often needs to happen on a recurring basis. And then let's go ahead and talk to the call center agents about a couple things. Number one, what are those segments? How do you recognize those segments? And importantly, how do you develop prescriptive action so you know how to respond when you, for example, identify an aspiring professional? Another great example of this from DirecTV, who's with us today, is the notion of a heart score. Now, DirecTV goes through a value analysis using a lot of good data and analytics that we collectively know how to do. and they assign each customer either 5 hearts if they've got a lot of value, they're good credit risk, they buy a lot of products, or there's 1 heart. And it's really as simple as recognizing the valuable customer when they call. So, I see you're an extremely valuable customer with us. What's cool about this is it's a relatively simple mechanism to communicate broadly in the organization the value of a customer, or said another way, a common currency to think about customers and think about their values. It's one thing to think about it at a high level, an abstract level. If you can bring it down so everybody in the organization can understand, that's a win. Now, talk a little bit about emerging new roles. We've heard a lot about chief customer officers and chief experience officers, and those are good ideas. But I want to introduce this interesting idea that may be appropriate, and that's the idea of a marketing technology office. Well, MTO, or marketing technology office, typically takes one of 3 forms. Either you have a marketing-focused team within IT, you have a liaison between marketing and IT, or you have a marketing technology group within the marketing department itself. Why is this? Because increasingly marketing is more technology. We've got data, we've got analytics, we've got database management, we have marketing execution tools, we have digital engagement. And a traditional marketer may be thinking about brand issues or other issues, and even a marketer who's oriented towards CRM may not know the technology to the point where they can define technology strategy, where they can develop applications, where they can measure performance, or perhaps do a vendor analysis and vendor selection, or audits of customer data, or managing those technology vendors and partners. 4th area, frontline empowerment. I consider frontline empowerment to be the last mile of CRM. And just like we talked about with the DirecTV example or any other example, if you cannot get what you want to do communicated to the people at the front line, your CRM and customer strategies may not be fully successful. What do we mean by frontline? We're talking about sales associates, we're talking about CSRs in a call center, we're talking about people at retail, we're talking about people perhaps at the front desk of a hotel. It's critical to get those people to totally understand what it is we're trying to do from a CRM and equip them with the tools and knowledge to execute accordingly. So 3 basic areas we want to talk about here. 1 is service standards and values. 2 is leveraging customer technology. And 3 is this whole idea of thinking globally but enabling people to act in response to local conditions. Let's talk with service standards and values. Essentially, it's a tale of 2 companies. If you think about a company like McDonald's, it's highly centralized, it's a command and control environment, and they're all about teaching operational standards and tactics. Their focus is on standardization and efficiency. It's a lot harder to do differentiated CRM in that kind of environment. And contrast that to something like Ritz-Carlton, more decentralized, it's oriented toward empowerment. What they teach is not as much operational standards and tactics as it is service standards and values. And what they focus on is communicating the right attitudes to their frontline employees so the frontline employees feel empowered to act in response to the individual customer engagement. Other examples of this are clearly luxury retailers. Well, at one end you have a fairly low margin food business, on the other hand you have higher margin luxury brands. And clearly there's a spectrum in between. Find the way you can balance operational standards and service standards as the situation demands. Second major area of frontline empowerment is leveraging customer technology. So we do a lot of good work. How do we actually get it in the hands of the frontline employees? A couple of great examples. An example where a bank teller can recognize me when I come to the window, and they can say, Mr. Crockett, I see that you're carrying a fairly high mortgage rate. Mortgage rates just dropped in the last week. Can I help you make an appointment with our loan officer so you can get you a better rate? Could save a considerable amount of money a year for you. Another example is property management systems at hotels and the pre-arrival report. So, for example, who do I give the upgrade to if I've got multiple gold level customers coming in? If we can provide that frontline front desk manager with information about the difference between 2 gold customers, one stayed 29 times, one stayed 16 times, we should be able to direct the hotel to give the upgrade to the person with 29 stays. And finally, this interesting example around acting locally. Imagine a manager of a quick service restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon is recognizing that he pretty much suspects that the restaurant's going to be half empty. What if he was able to access the analysis that we had done in an effective way to identify price-sensitive customers, previously identified customers, and send those customers an offer that says, tonight only, half price dinner, fills the restaurant, gets utilization of the staff, and the offer is targeted only to the people who are likely to respond to a discount offer, so it's not going to take away from other diners. So just to wrap up, key takeaways, 4 major areas of organization as a CRM building block. Leadership alignment around sponsorship, not permission, and true leadership. Integrated collaborative work groups around who does what at every level. High-performing team, making the vision real for your people. And frontline empowerment, enabling your frontline customers to do the right things for their customers. Thanks for your attention today. Appreciate your time.